So if we could chant together the Symbolism, which is in the Red Service book and it's on page 47, if you could join me, please. 보겐 기기 이지 무격 요새 엔며 무요 도샤 니치가츠마니 슈코 엔요 가이시츠 원페 윤약 주력 뇨라이 요겐 조세문인 쇼각 다이언 고르지뽀 가이몬 쇼진 삼마이 지에 이토크 무려 슈쇼케 진타이 젠넨 쇼부츠 호카이 그진진노 그고 가이타이 무모 요크누 세소뇨무 닌노 시시 진토크 무려 극근 고다이 지혜지묘 고묘 이소 신다이 라이센 가가사브츠 자이쇼호 가도쇼지 미프게다츠 프세조이 가인닌 쇼진 뇨세 산마이 지혜 이조 고세 토크부츠 프교 시간 이사이 크크 이사 다이언 계시 으부츠 약sen 녹그만 무료 다이쇼 슈뇨 고자 그요 이사이 시토 쇼부츠 분요 그도 겐쇼 프약 인요 고자 쇼부츠 세카이 부프카케 무슈센도 고묘시쇼 헨시쇼콕 뇨세 쇼진 이진난료 료가사브츠 고쿠도 다이이치 고슈키묘 도조 조셋 고쿠뇨 나이언 니무 도소 가토 아이민 도다츠 이사이 지포 라이쇼 신네츠 쇼조 이토 가콕 게라쿠 안논 고부츠 심여 제야 신쇼 호츠가 노히 리기쇼 쇼욕 지포 세손 지혜 무게 조료 시손 지야 신교 계조 신시 쇼크 도크추 가교 쇼진 닌주 부케 간니시크도크 묘도 세이사이 Ojo Ananto. Namadots, 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 namadots. Well, greetings from New York. I hope everybody's doing well. Hopefully we won't have any more technical glitches. I've got my Dharma talk right here. So as we said when we designed Dharma Breeze, we wanted the program to be a little different than a regular Sunday service. And because it is more intimate, because we are on Zoom, and that because we do also have the discussion group afterwards, is that I'd like to take the talk more for something for us to self-reflect upon. So today we're going to be talking about Amida Buddha, and I purposely made it very vague. So are we talking about the Amida Buddha? What does it represent? What is the symbolism? Is it a person, etc.? I wanted to leave that open for us to think about. So first of all, when I am introduced to people as a Buddhist minister, a lot of the questions is, well, what is the Buddha to you? Is the Buddha your God? Is the Buddha somebody that you follow? And I think people coming from other religious traditions might not understand the idea of what our relationship is with the Buddha. And as I've mentioned many times before, all of us have a very different interaction or feeling about how we relate to the Buddha. So before we talk about Amida Buddha specifically, which is the Buddha that we emphasize the most in our school of Pure Land Buddhism, Jodo Shinshu, just to like to reflect briefly upon the historical Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha. When I did the introduction to Buddhist class, and I am re-recording them, we talked about that Shakyamuni Buddha was a historical person that lived between what is now India and Nepal over 2,500 years ago. Now, when you read the Buddhist texts, the Buddhist sutras or suttas, a lot of times the Buddha is given a lot of mystique. There's a lot of supernatural powers that the Buddha can see through time, that Buddha can transfer to other places. And we have to realize that when we read these ancient texts, what they're trying to do is they're trying to convey the teachings of the Buddha in a story form. And as we've said before in other classes, that doesn't mean that they're supposed to be taken necessarily literally. So before we go into the discussion about Amida Buddha, just to reconfirm that Shakyamuni Buddha was a historical person, was not a prophet or a god or a deity. Now, when I said that, it's interesting because here in New York, I'm at the parsonage here at the New York Buddhist Church in Manhattan, and we're near Columbia University. So we get lots of people walking by, and the doorbell rang, and I answered the door just a couple of days ago, and it was a gentleman from Malaysia, a Buddhist, practicing Buddhist from Malaysia, and he wanted to come in and see our Onaijin or our Hondo. And so he came in, and so he looked at me and he saw the statue of Amida Buddha. He goes, "Oh, you're a Pure Land Buddhist. I am too." And I said, "Oh, that's nice." And so then he goes down, but then what he did, what we don't do, is that he got down on all four and did full prostrations, down and back up, and then going this and taking his onenjus and up and down, up and down. And I was standing there very solemnly because I didn't want to interfere, but it really was moving for me because here this person identifies as a Pure Land Buddhist like we are, but then this devotion to the idea of Amida Buddha was really inspiring to me, but also made me think about how we, in our school of Jodo Shinshu, how we don't emphasize that devotional aspect. Many of you know that I went to the Institute of Buddhist Studies and received my master's in Buddhist education. That's part of becoming a minister for the Buddhist Churches of America. And living in the dormitory could have been a movie of the week because we had people from different backgrounds. We had a Korean Zen nun who lived there, and then we had Bhante, who a lot of you know through the BCA. He's a Theravadan monk, and that he lives there on and off through the year and teaches classes on general Buddhism. But again, with Bhante, it'd be very interesting because there is this devotional component. Now, you have to realize that in Theravadan Buddhism, again, not to oversimplify it, but they're trying to follow the teachings or follow the path that the Shakyamuni Buddha did himself, the same type of practices, the same type of meditation. And then, and their understanding is that you have these monks and nuns, mostly monks, and those people are considered holy. And the reason that they're considered holy is they're on the step into reaching Buddhahood. And for us, in coming from a Mahayana or a Pure Land perspective, this idea of the devotion to the monks might seem a little odd. I remember very clearly trying not to look shocked when people came in that were Bhante's followers, and they're down and they're literally kissing his feet. And they're not kissing Bhante's feet, they're kissing the feet of the foot of the Buddha, because they feel that Bhante represents the Buddha in a living sense, that yes, he is an ordinary person, but he is working towards enlightenment, so he represents that. So in their tradition, they do not handle money. In the temples, the lay followers, provide all the food for them. They do not do these secular things. But the idea is that they are special because they are going to reach Buddhahood. Now, living with Bhante was interesting because we're living in the kitchen, we're having meals together, and so he would very calmly say things like, "Oh, well, because he thinks that our form of Buddhism is not authentic," and he'll tell you that, and it's not a value judgment on Bhante's part; it's just that we're wrong. And so we had many interesting conversations about that. So, for example, when we're talking about the Buddha, a lot of times we refer to Buddha nature, and he says that's a made-up word. There is no such thing as Buddha nature. I go, okay, Bhante. So again, getting back to this idea before we talk about Amida Buddha. So in these forms of Buddhism, there's this very devout practice where they do the prostrations. There's the food gathering, the alms. And so when they give alms to the monks, they are gaining Buddhist merit, very different than our understanding of how we relate to the Buddha. So as I said at the very beginning, and I'm sure for you that identifies Buddhist too, when your friends or some people in the general community find out that you follow the Buddhist teachings, they say, well, what is the Buddha? What does it represent to you? And so then it comes to us with Jodo Shinshu Buddhism, and we talk about Amida Buddha. And it's very confusing. I remember very clearly walking into the Seattle Betsuin for the first time and looking at the statue and thinking, is that Shakyamuni Buddha? And of course it's not, it's Amida Buddha. So I'm sure that this is one of the questions that we get asked on a lot of Sundays. What is that statue? Now at Ekoji, we know that we do have a statue. Unfortunately, when I was serving there 10 years ago, he decided to take a nap and fell down, and he's been resting since. And I hope that we can do a fundraiser to get him out of that box. But in the Aonaijin, or the altar area, instead of having a statue of the Buddha, we have what we call is the Myogo, which are the Chinese, Japanese characters that say Namo Amida Butsu. So it would have been interesting for the Malaysian Buddhists to go to Ekoji and look, where's the Buddha statue? So the idea is that, in our tradition, the Myogo or a statue or a scroll of a painting of Amida Buddha all have the same weight. So you look at this, and then the people like Bhante would say to me, well, where's the Buddha? They're a Buddhist. I don't see a Buddha in your altar. But we say that we have Amida Buddha. Now, again, going back to the ideas of, legends and stories, there's a great story about Dharmakara, who was a bodhisattva that vowed to save all sentient beings. Now, one of the things that I've talked to some of you in person about is that sometimes I think that when we talk about Jodo Shinshu Buddhism, we kind of get stuck in some very pat phrases or terminology. So we can say, oh, Amida Buddha is a symbolic Buddha, the Buddha never existed. But the idea behind what Amida Buddha is very personal. And Shinran was very devout to Amida Buddha. If you read the writings of Shinran and Ashini, his wife, they're very devout, and they say, I hope to see you in the Pure Land, and may you be blessed. So they refer to these things a lot that he does not refer to necessarily in his doctrine or his teachings in the Kyogyo Shinsho. So the idea of a cosmic Buddha, now, so we know we have the historical Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, and then we have all these cosmic Buddhas. And I think perhaps when we look at a picture from the Tibetan tradition and you see these different Buddhas, you realize there's a plethora of different types of Buddhas, of what they call cosmic Buddhas. And what these ideas are is that they represent certain teachings of the Dharma, and they concentrate on those ideas of what is the essential teaching. So in our school of Buddhism, which is a Pure Land school, Amida or Amitabha is our central idea, our central focus point. And so the story goes is that the Buddha, this Bodhisattva said, if I do not reach enlightenment, I want to save all sentient beings. And we're going to read the 18th vow here in a moment. Now, again, thinking about what a Buddha is and how we relate to the Buddha, one of the questions that I get asked most often when the people, I have my office hours, is the idea of self-power and other power. And so this idea of that our self-practice or self-enlightenment, do we reach enlightenment through our own practice? And that Shinran Shonin, and I'll say it again, he said very clearly, there's many paths that are valid, and maybe one person will be able to follow the path that Shakyamuni did, or maybe they can be a Zen practitioner and find enlightenment through sitting in Zazen. But he was saying for himself, and thinking for a lot of the rest of the people that live in the everyday world, the householder life like we all have, is that the idea of that practice is not very realistic. And so how do you express this idea? Now, we've talked in my classes or my Dharma talks before about words, and so it's like entrusting or faith. For those of us that come from different faith-based traditions, when I hear the word faith, it's not what I think of what the story of Amida Buddha is. So the idea of Amida Buddha is a cosmic Buddha, and one of the things I would really like to emphasize is that the symbolic Buddha goes beyond human form, beyond human concept. So for us in English, we usually use a lot of pronouns. In the Japanese, they refer to Amida Buddha as it, because Amida Buddha is not male, it's not female. It's not of this world. It is beyond our human conception. And so this idea, and then that's why Renyo Shonin over 500 years ago said, when we have the altar, it's probably better for us to have myogo or have the writings of Namo Amida Butsu. So when people look at the statue, they're not thinking of it as a person. They're not making it into a dichotomy of like, this is me and that's the Buddha. The idea is that the idea of oneness. And so this idea with Amida Buddha is, again, instead of focusing necessarily on the story of how he became Amida Buddha, the idea is that the process has already been started. And so if I've known that several of you have told me that you've been reading the larger sutra, which is one of our three important sutras that we have in our school of Pure Land Buddhism. And so the larger sutra, Amida Buddha represents immeasurable life and light. So when you go and you look at some of our iconography, some of our Buddhist art, you will see, for example, that there's a lot of times where there's rays of light coming out from behind Amida Buddha. And for those of you that might have a statue, or if your temple has a traditional statue, sometimes that is represented by this, it looks like spokes behind Amida Buddha. And there's 48 of them, which represent the 48 vows that Amida Buddha said that he would do, or it would do, for all of humanity and to become a Buddha. And so the symbolism behind it is quite beautiful, because the idea is that this light, this infinite light, is what is the teachings of the Dharma. And the idea is that the story says is that it shines brighter than the moon or the sun. There's no shadows. It's non-discriminative. It shines equally upon everyone. I think it's a very beautiful concept, that Amida Buddha or the teachings are there and they're shared equally with everyone, and it's radiant like light. I always like to geek out a little bit. So the iconography that we have is for our school of Buddhism, which is the Western school. If you go to Higashi Jodo Shinshu Temple, which is the Eastern school, they don't have the lights coming out. It looks like there's a big boat behind the Buddha. So they actually have different representations of what Amida Buddha is like. I'm not supposed to be materialistic, but for some reason, people like to give me Buddhist statues, which is great. Actually, I have, I've got all kinds. I have one that was given to me from Malaysia, but the one I'd like to show right now, since we aren't in the Hondo, and that the Obutsudan that's behind me, you really can't see it very clearly, but So the statue behind me is our traditional Jodo Shinshu, where it's got the spokes of light and that he is resting on the lotus petals. But one of the things about Amida Buddha, about Pure Land Buddhism, is that the Dharma is active. It's always in constant motion. And it takes us to try to realize that. And it might take our whole lifetime for us to really understand that all of this Dharma, all of these teachings are surrounding us. Our Buddha nature is there constantly. And so all of these gentle reminders when we go to the temple or if we have an Obutsudan at home. So here is a very good example of a statue of Amida Buddha. Now, one of the things that is important is that you see, when you see a portrait of Shakyamuni Buddha, how is he usually portrayed? He's usually sitting down in meditation, right? A lot of the statues that you see, he's sitting in the lotus position with his legs crossed and he's meditating. Well, there's a very specific reason why the Amida Buddha is represented in this form, is because it's very interactive. And so instead of sitting down in contemplation, the idea that the enlightenment or the teachings is being shared constantly all times from the Buddha. And actually, he's got the mudras, the hands of wisdom and compassion. And again, when we say wisdom, we're talking about spiritual wisdom, and we're talking about compassion. We're talking about the ultimate compassion, about for all sentient beings. And so he's standing, so the Dharma is interacting with us. I'll put you down, excuse me. Now, if you're lucky enough to be able to go into an Onaijin, which is the altar area, I don't remember if it's in Seattle like that, but I do know that in Fresno, the statue is literally leaning forward at about an angle like this. And the idea is because, again, Amida Buddha is interacting with us at all given times, that the Dharma is this reciprocal thing where it is alive, a verb, so to speak. And so, that is the symbolism about Amida Buddha. Now, again, getting back to the idea of like when I met this gentleman from Malaysia a couple of days ago and he got down and he prostrated, the idea of how people relate to that image or how they relate to the Onaijin is very different. And so the Buddha, we talk about in Buddhism, we say it's called upaya in Sanskrit and it's hoben in Japanese, which means is the way that you understand the Dharma is your understanding and it's not right or wrong. Now, obviously, you can open a textbook and say, well, it says here this, but the idea is that when we think about the Buddha, when we think about Amida Buddha, it's our personal interrelationship. It's our personal connection with this thing that we call the Dharma or the teachings. And so I had the experience in Fresno where we had an elderly member. She must have been in her 90s, and she would come in and she would pray to the statue every Sunday before service, and she would give food offerings. So to her, Amida Buddha was a living being. This was who was protecting her. And it was interesting talking to her because she was very gracious. She was Nisei, second generation Japanese American, and that she got so much comfort out of that idea that Amida Buddha is literally looking over her. Now, as my role as a minister, I'm not going to say I disagree with you. That's not how I look at it. But when you think about it, it's kind of a nuance, is that she literally thinks that Amida Buddha is looking from the Pure Land over her. But at the same time, my understanding is that the Dharma is always with us and is present with us in our Buddha nature. So is it really that different? Maybe she's being a little more concrete, a little more specific, but I think the idea is very similar. So the thing is that with getting back to the idea of Amida Buddha, again, it's beyond anything, beyond our comprehension. And some people feel uncomfortable with that. Oh, they always say, Buddhism is like, oh, it's beyond your understanding. It's always like the tip is just a little bit further. You can't quite understand it. But the idea is that the idea of the Dharma is that it is not able for us to understand 100% completely, both intellectually. So we need to interact with it. So again, with the story of the Dharmakara who became Amida Buddha, that he took 48 vows in order for sentient beings to be able to understand and reach the Pure Land. And then Shinran Shonin picked out the 18th vow as the most significant vow. And I would like to read it because we used to read this every Sunday in Dharma school for the kids in Fresno, so they have it memorized. And so it says, aspiring to be born in my land and saying my name, perhaps even 10 times, should not be born, saying my name perhaps even 10 times, should not be born in my land, should not be born there, may I not attain the supreme enlightenment. And of course, this is the part that everybody is upset about. Excluded are those who commit the 5 grave offenses and those who slander the right Dharma. Okay. So what it is saying, a lot of times people will focus on the logical point of view. Well, he must have fulfilled the vows because he's the Amida Buddha. But the idea is that in this writing, this is the idea that it's guaranteed for all of us to be able to reach nirvana or the Pure Land. And just so those people that are wondering what are the 5 grave offenses, that's one of them is killing your mother, another one is killing your father, killing an arahat or a bodhisattva, injuring the body of a Buddha, and causing, and I thought this one's interesting, the last one's causing division in the Buddhist community. So those are the 5 grave offenses. So, and I'm really looking forward to our discussion group because this is ripe for us to be talking about, do we think that the 5 grave offenses should be included in this? Do we really, what's this idea of the story behind Amida Buddha taking care of everyone? Now, one of the things, and I'll finish up here because I would like us to go into the discussion group, but our founder Shinran Shonin's take on Amida Buddha, again, this idea of self-power or other power, which we always get very dualistic about, is the idea is that in his mind, our human state, that we are not able to follow the teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha, and that we have all of this potentiality given to us by Amida Buddha and the Dharma, and we need to realize that, we need to understand that. And so that's where we have the discussion of like the word Shinjin, which we won't talk about because that's, a whole 2-hour, 5-hour lecture in itself. But the idea is that the Dharma constantly surrounds us, and that Amida Buddha is the vehicle for us to try to understand how it is part of our daily life. And so next time you go to a temple, when you see the statue, or if you look at the scroll and you see the light going everywhere, and you realize that the statue is actually leaning towards you to engage you, again, a lot of us have discussed in our life past, how we look at the Dharma, how it relates to our life really changes and matures over the years. And so this idea, I remember when I first heard about Amida Buddha, I didn't care for it. I thought it was kind of odd. But the idea is, as I get older, is that gentle reminder that the Dharma is always with us. And so, again, I'd like to thank you very much for attending tonight's service. I would like us to, that concludes my Dharma talk today. And before we go into our discussion group, I would like us all to do a joint reading together. So if you could go and open the PDF, and so it's called Read, it's the Creed number 1, and it's on page number 4 in the Red Book. So Creed number 1. We rely upon Amida Tathagata with our whole heart for the enlightenment in the life to come, abstaining from all sundry practices and teachings, and giving up the trust in our limited self. We believe that the assurance of birth comes at the very moment we entrust, and we call the name Namo Amida Butsu in joy and gratitude for the Buddha's compassion. We also acknowledge gratefully the benign benevolence of our founder and the succeeding masters who have led us to believe us in this profound teaching, and we do now endeavor to follow throughout our lives the way laid down for us. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. All right, now I'd like us to do a short silent meditation, and then we will go into our discussion. So please sit back in your chair, sit erect and relax. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Datsu.